Good evening. Welcome to the world tonight. Your usual ritual, I'm sure, for all of you to watch. We have a loaded show tonight, and because of good old stuff, we will get right to it. Our first item on the show tonight is about China's new big free trade deal with Asia. I know the horrors of the China hawks must be screaming across the world with this new deal. It was signed with numerous Asian countries that are part of ASEAN. And Adam can explain a little more of what this deal includes.
Yes, so this very exciting new trade deal for the region is called the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which isn't as exciting to say as TPP, but we will try our best to continue with that. So essentially it is a Chinese or partly Chinese-led initiative with 14 other Asia-Pacific countries that have agreed to this trade agreement, which sets out various regulations on certain goods and trade deals, tariffs. This sort of expected stuff would come along with a trade deal. So, for example, talks about goods, services, cross-border investments, and new rules for increasingly important areas such as electronic commerce and intellectual property. Key thing to add, actually, about this very specific trade deal is that unlike measures like TPP or the new, is it comprehensive? Is it CPTPP or something similar to that? Basically, the new TPP, which was introduced after the United States withdrew from TPP itself. It doesn't include measures on workers' rights or environmental regulations and similar measures that were a significant aim that the United States tried to present forward with the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So who does this involve? This trade agreement involves major economies like Japan. It involves Indonesia. It involves the Pacific countries such as Australia and South Korea, as well as others. And I just want to say that the two main things that this trade deal represents. One, it means that Asia-Pacific nations aren't rejecting trade with China, despite the mistakes of the Chinese government regarding the COVID-19 handling and sharing of information regarding the pandemic that they essentially let spread out of control, which was definitely subject to speculation prior to this trade agreement, primarily because the governments of Japan and South Korea had set out this idea that they were instead going to try and work away with China, try and incentivize their businesses to move home and stay away from working primarily in China. However, this trade agreement seems to set that off a little bit. And the second point is that the United States is not a member of this trade agreement, and it is ultimately absent from the debating floor of the world's trading standards, specifically in the expanding and incredibly important market of the Asia-Pacific region. So yeah, there are ultimately a lot of things to highlight. Especially also what this means for a future President Biden administration who attempts to try and recreate what was the Trans-Pacific Partnership to ultimately try and stifle Chinese growth and domination of Asia's markets. But this trade deal itself definitely seems to represent a step back for that aim. Peter, what do you think are the actual consequences of this trade agreement being brought forward and the absence of the United States from it?
Well, I think this is a big win for China in the trade regards. Increases the regional power in what they've been seeking. This is a big blow to American interests in Asia. This was the whole nightmare scenario that Americans, foreign policy experts have been warning and fearing about for years. And with the TPP still not, with the U.S.'s involvement, it's a dangerous trend. And now there's rumors this week from Prime Minister of Japan that they may seek to add China into the TPP, which if that were the case, that'd be a devastating blow should it go forward. Obviously, that, of course, we don't know if that's actually what would happen or if it's just talking hyperboles to maybe get the U.S. incoming administration that viewed the TPP as a more important thing. But yeah, I mean, this is a big blow for the U.S. and its, economic standing in the region. And for China, it's a big win. It's a coup. They have a trading agreement now with Japan and South Korea and and Philippines and other places. And this increases the Chinese market's potential to increase even with the COVID era. So a big win for Xi Jinping and his government, and a big loss for the American government.
An interesting element actually to talk about with this new agreement is that it wasn't primarily China who was leading it, which may come as a surprise given how important it seems to be as a win for China. No, instead it was primarily Japan who was pushing forward with this idea. The negotiations have been going on now for about 8 years and have included other partners such as India, who withdrew last year in the agreement. But ultimately, yeah, as you state, it's represents a moment in which the importance or the dominant player in Asia is shifting more towards China, because ultimately money talks a lot, especially in foreign affairs. So yeah, as you stated, it will be very important for China, and it will also be a major challenge for the next administration of the United States, because they're going to have to counter it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the interesting developments that has been occurring is that Prime Minister Suga of Japan has been much more warm with China than Abe was ever in his tenure in office, which is really an interesting thing to start seeing develop now. We don't know whether that would continue with a potential Biden administration, but it's an interesting development of what's occurring with the Chinese-Japanese relationship.
Indeed, yeah, 100%. The final thing I'd just like to quickly add on to this is Australia and New Zealand's role in this. They are members of the trade agreement, and Scott Morrison has stated that this is a good thing for Australian farmers and others who seek to benefit from this trade deal. So traditionally, allies of the West or strong members of the West are ultimately not aligning themselves with China per se, but allowing warmer relationships to actually grow. Now, I mean, partly this could be understood as the fact that, as I stated earlier, this isn't an entirely Chinese-led initiative. Ultimately, it is agreement of countries coming together, but it does represent the fact that the United States isn't a member of it. There's still the CPTPP, which is the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is basically, as I was saying earlier, what developed out of the TPP. But yeah, ultimately, it does lead very interesting questions to where trade relations will grow in the future. And also, I'd just like to leave as a final note, the fact that China is going to be able to dictate the terms of global trade, and environmental regulations, which are obviously important for combating climate change, and workers' rights aren't a part of this agreement and aren't likely to be a part of it, given how tough they are to negotiate. But yes, that's all I have to say on the matter as a final note.
Yeah, my final note is, I think the Australia perspective is very interesting, considering that the liberal-led government that has been in power since 2013 has been, in some aspects, been moving away from China on the national security front, but then, warming up on economic front. So it's interesting to see the perspective there. And I think a new interesting thing will be, just on the subject of trade, will be how the incoming Biden administration will deal with the WTO, because there's no doubt in my mind that the United States is still going to be a very angry member of the WTO in its mind, feeling that an organization it helped create is not helping its values. So it'll be interesting to see how a Biden administration will help or deal with trade on the marketplace of the global marketplace.
Yep, completely agree.
Yeah. Moving on to our second topic of the day, and that is the election that Adam mentioned, I believe, at the last episode, or the episode prior to the last episode. That is the Myanmar election. See, an election, though, one could question if it's actually a legitimate election under international standards, but I hand it over to Adam to explain the results.
Yes, so Myanmar has had a very complicated political past, primarily due to the fact that it is a country that attempts to have a democracy while having a very overstretching military at its front. But just to look at this election and try and summarize it the best. So this saw Aung San Suu Kyi, again, it's World Tonight, our pronunciation is not the best, who is the main figurehead and has been the main figurehead for years now of this pro-democracy element within Myanmar, who wants to see the role of the military diminished in what the political role. They want to see it gone, essentially. This is also seeing her party, the National League for Democracy, being returned to power with a majority, slightly increased majority, with 138 seats in the upper house of the legislature, which represents about 60% of the seats, and 258 seats in the lower house, which represents, again, about 60% of the seats. The party has once again been barred from a 2/3 majority to alter the country's constitution and get rid of this one that was drafted by the military, because the military was able to guarantee themselves a means so that 25% of the seats are exclusively for military appointees. So the ability to alter the constitution is not available to them at all. And also, given the fact that the political party which represents the military returned with to the extent where they would have been able to block any sort of legislative reforms, even if the National League for Democracy won every single seat. So it does sort of represent the overwhelming power that the military has. Now, the major thing to look at with this election is the role of ethnic minorities within Myanmar. So the reason why Peter was stating that they weren't free or fair is for a number of reasons. So, for example, ethnic warfare within Myanmar, especially against Rohingya Muslims within the country, has denied hundreds of thousands the ability to vote because they've either been forced to flee the country or be subject to genocide, or they've had their seats being declared vacant due to and cancelled due to conflict in the region. And this extends to other ethnic minority groups as well, where they're seeing the military really sort of dictate which regions get to vote. The NLD has also engaged in a number of poor practices, which would be argued to represent that of a one-party state, if it was, primarily because they're able to completely dominate the media by utilizing the election commission, who are the ones who set forward who can be on TV and who can be on the radio. So they allow the NLD to have unjustified coverage, for their platform. Comparatively, their reach is massive. Furthermore, the election commission has also engaged in barring certain candidates, primarily from those Rohingya seats, from actually being able to stand at all. Furthermore, the fact that the military has denied information and the internet to be available in certain regions due to security concerns means that people aren't able to tell when they need to vote or where to vote or information about who they're electing. So there's a lot of information here and a lot of different examples which ultimately show a situation which isn't good at all, because people are being denied the ability to truly express their vote. This has led to the extent where the All Burma Federation of Trade Unions and the All Burma Federation of Student Unions have engaged in a boycott for the election and any subsequent elections until the military drafted constitution is amended to be more democratic. This really represents something quite interesting, because the National League for Democracy represented this very anti-authoritarian, anti-junta political party, but is ultimately engaged with its time in power, primarily because they have to work with the military due to the fact that they have such a prevalent role, that they've allowed the military to engage in these ethnic cleansing campaigns without any real means of trying to stop them or condemn them. So that's the real takeaway from this election, beyond her regaining this colossal majority, is that nothing is likely to change, and the complicity with the military in this genocide against Rohingya Muslims and also other ethnic groups is going to, though not to the extent of a genocide, it's still ethnic warfare, is going to continue further and further and not get any better anytime soon.
Yeah, I think that I couldn't have heard a more eloquently, beautifully stated statement on this, and I think that was a perfect good point. Yeah, I think we are at the very much the sad fall of Aung San Suu Kyi, from this Nobel Prize winner of liberty, freedom, and democracy, into basically a genocider, and it's quite sad to see this. And ironically, we're saying this when the word genocide on the 75th anniversary of the Nuremberg trials. But yeah, I mean, it's very sad to see, and it's the oppression against the Rohingyas continue, and even with the military or not, no one in the mainstream of Myanmar politics has had the courage or the guts to condemn it. And yeah, the military itself remains in very much good power control of the country, and a lot of its result is really not surprising. It was almost as if you could say expected.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. She is an incredibly popular figure. She has a cult of personality built around her because she appeals so well to the majority, who seem to be in this paradox of accepting, obviously, the continued renewal of her election and rejecting the military, while also sustaining this state, which has such an overwhelming role for the military. I mean, she isn't actually able to gain the role of president because the military wrote in the constitution that that's for them. So yeah, very overwhelming control. And to be honest, you could make the argument, prior to the complicity in genocide, that this is being done because they can't do anything else. There's no other way of stopping it. But the real working with the military to this extent reveals that their noble aim and goal has really gone back in on itself, and isn't in any way what it was attempting to be.
I mean, one could make the argument, and I obviously am not trying to stir, that they were lying in a sense about, they were, in a sense, they were this big, reformists, but once they got to power, they saw, we're friends with the military. We'll be the ones this time, getting to share the platter of power. And yeah, she is very, liked. I mean, she is the state counselor for Myanmar, which is effectively prime minister, but with a nice title. But yeah, it's quite sad. And the probably continuing of the genocide against the Rohingya people will be occurring from the Myanmar military, and one can only, hope that there's at least some slowness, but the more than likelihood is it's just a continuation of what we've seen in the last 6 years of Myanmar's, progress that it looked like it started in 2010, slipping away.
Yeah. Yeah, I just do find this interesting, that the fact that she specifically is barred from actually ever holding the role of presidency, which is just an interesting note to add on there. But yeah, speaking of reformist candidates turning out to not be as reformist as they state they are, and also having Nobel Peace Prizes, we go to Tigray, where I'm just going to give you a brief update on the conflict that has been going on there and the situation, how it's been developing. So just to give a brief summary, I believe 2 weeks ago, it was alleged by the Ethiopian military that the major political party in Tigray, who have been long dominant within Ethiopian politics, but have basically been ostracized by the current prime minister, who has set himself out as a very reformist candidate. Essentially, they alleged that they had attacked Eritrean military, they had attacked Ethiopian federal military dressed up as Eritrean soldiers to try and they alleged to provoke some form of conflict. And the way that the Ethiopian government has responded is to engage in a major conflict against the government in the region to try and force federal control over it. And the conflict has significantly descended into increased violence, and the UN has gone to the extent where the UN has called upon humanitarian corridors to be established as the conflict continues to be developing, primarily because access to healthcare is being significantly reduced, access to food is being reduced, water, all of these essentials to sustain oneself is being taken because of the conflict. Furthermore, the reports extend that hundreds of people have been killed in the fighting, either on the ground by conventional forces or by airstrikes. And it's expected that this conflict will continue until the Ethiopian military has entire control of the region. They recently stated that they've captured further towns and cities, which are both strategically important and are set to capture the capital city of Tigray, anytime soon. Furthermore, I'd like to quickly stress that these claims are very difficult and almost impossible to be verified, primarily because the Ethiopian government has cut off any means of information flowing in or out of the region. So yeah, that's just the overview of the conflict as it's going. One final thing I'd like to touch upon with the update is that ceasefires have been attempted by the UN and African Union to be called. However, they've been rejected by the Ethiopian government. And finally, at least 33,000 refugees have already crossed Ethiopia's border into Sudan. And the UN Refugee Agency has said it is preparing for up to 200,000 people to arrive over the next few weeks and months as the conflict continues. So yeah, that is the continuation of the updates there, which stem all the way back. And I would suggest watching previous The World Tonight to get a good understanding of why this conflict has actually grown to be what it is now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there was a good rundown of what we have, and I think it's the conflict in Tigray is a very depressing thing to read about, and an already depressing year, and to see that again that we've already heard today that the Ethiopian military hit a university, and I'm sure they'll claim it was an accident, though I have high doubts on that. And we've seen reports of the Ethiopian military also acting what would be considered against law, international law and standard norms, in how of course this is just all reporting that's being said, and of course as mentioned, because Ethiopia has cut off internet services and other technological services to Tigray, we really don't have full-fledged accurate information. We're only reporting what other sources and other different news sources have presented from what they've heard on the ground. It's also quite, as noted, to mention Ethiopia's Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, who had won the Nobel Peace Prize just 2 years ago for brokering peace with a neighboring country of Eritrea, and from the peacemaker, now he seems to be the war hawk, which is truly a transformation from peacemaker to war hawk. And he is very adamant that he is doing this in the national preservation of Ethiopia, and that Tigray is a rogue region that is harming Ethiopia's image. Again, that's his word. More than likely, it's probably not true, but that is his line. And yeah, it's a very dangerous situation that, if spirals out of control, could lead to a humanitarian disaster in the Horn of Africa, with refugees trying to run to Sudan or other parts. And also, the Horn of Africa is a very unstable place. If we've seen throughout history, one little trigger in one place sets off another spark somewhere else. And with the global pandemic also hitting Africa very hard as well, there's a big danger that with this refugee crisis, that there could be a massive COVID outbreak as well.
Yeah, another element to look at this is the complete, I've talked about this previously in the show, but the complete absence of the United States or even any form of pressure being asserted against Ethiopia. Really, Ethiopia is one of the US's key allies in Africa, and the inability to actually exert any form of control, possibly because the Trump administration doesn't care. They have different things to focus on, such as the election and COVID response. But the actual the key players aren't there, and if those key players aren't there, then Ethiopia isn't going to listen to the African Union. Its headquarters is based there. Ethiopia has been a leader of the African Union, and of course they aren't going to feel like they're going to be talked down to by it. And the UN doesn't have any major power because Security Council members aren't going to pay any real attention, because if the EU aren't already, the United States isn't already, China and Russia certainly aren't going to, because ultimately this a strong centralized Ethiopia is good economically for them. Then there's no real pushback against it. And so the abuses of military force are going to go unresolved, despite, as you were stating before, reported human rights abuses and the possible breaking of international law. So lots of elements there to be concerned about. And given the lack of opposition, it really does seem like this conflict will evolve into the Ethiopian military assuming some kind of control, and the Tigray People's Liberation Front, who are the government of the region, will try and engage in some form of guerrilla war if that's the strategy they'll have to pursue. But yes, ultimately, it is a conflict which isn't being resolved by any major players, and so will likely continue until Ethiopia, who are definitely the dominant winners here, get what they want entirely.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I think none of the powers in the world that is care. I mean, the U.S. has a very strong alliance with Ethiopia, military exercises and economic partnerships. So that's absent. Russia and China, both, especially in China's case, has started to make economic ties with Ethiopia. So there is likely there, and yeah, the rest of the Security Council. Britain has strong relations with Ethiopia, as do the French. So there's not going to be any player in a sense coming to the rescue of the people of Tigray, and it will just be inevitably a military domination of the region, and very likely very unfortunate, bad, sad news when we probably read about human atrocities being committed in that military victory.
Yep. And from that, let's go on to talk about the recently reported assassination of Al-Qaeda's second sort of in-command figure, top guy, whatever term you want to use. No, so the summary here is that Al-Qaeda's second highest leader, the mastermind behind the 1998 attacks on American embassies in Africa, was killed in Iran 3 months ago, which intelligence officials have confirmed. Now, this operation was done by Israeli agents at the behest of the United States. So who was the person that was killed? So this is Abu Muhammad al-Masri. Again, apologies for any mispronunciation, though I don't imagine we'll care about a dead Al-Qaeda leader, who, as I stated, gunned down by 2 assassins on the anniversary of the embassy attacks, which he had coordinated. So al-Masri was one of Al-Qaeda's founding leaders and a long-time feature on the FBI's most wanted terror list, and has been linked to the deaths of hundreds. So there's lots of questions to serve out of this assassination. First of all, why was he in Iran, given the opposition of his group with the Iranian government, who have fought in places like Iraq, and also represent entirely different sectarian lines, one being a Shiite theocracy and the other being a Sunni jihadist group. Now, there are some, speculation about this, which I can offer. So officials told the New York Times that they may have kept him as an insurance so that the group the group being Al-Qaeda, would not conduct any operations in Iran. Or there's also speculation that they kept him in a safe environment to run operations against the United States, because if he was in Afghanistan, there is always the possibility that he could have been killed there, or any other nations in which the United States have some form of presence, of which Iran is not one of those. That's just the broad overview. What do you think, Peter, about the significance of this? Do you think this is something very big to see Iran housing an Al-Qaeda agent? I mean, it's not the first time it's being done before, but what's the significance of this?
I think it confirms the usual, that Iran loves harboring terrorist suspects that kill Americans. So that's always the confirmed. Killing Mr. Abu Muhammad, obviously by the Israelis, almost certainly had to have a U.S. standby order to sign off on it. So I'm sure this was a coordinated effort to take him out, and I'm not surprised, of course, to find this news report from the media outlets saying he was in Iran. I mean, Iran's had a lovely history of hiding other terrorist suspects there over the years. But I'm not surprised. Al-Qaeda loses its number 2. They will have to replace him with someone else who if history is any indication, will probably be killed very shortly in a either assassination or by a drone strike. And yeah, I mean, their leadership structure, I mean, Al-Qaeda remains a very dangerous terrorist organization, but it's very much a shell of what it used to be 20 years ago when it, did its horrendous attack on the United States.
So talking about his death, what does this mean? Well, the former director of the National Counterterrorism Center, Nicholas J. Rasmussen, offers an opinion here. He said, this further cuts links between old school Al-Qaeda and the modern jihadist groups, which have formed, following the sort of decline of its strength that it once had. But yeah, it mainly represents a fracturing of the group because he has been such an effective operator and the ability to organize these terrorist attacks. So with his loss, there's definitely, intelligence. The ability of Al-Qaeda's intelligence is reducing significantly because of that, or at least that's what those who are specialists in the area have offered as their opinions of it.
And this is on the heels of a rumored report. Of course, this is of course speculation. We take this with great assault that Al-Qaeda's leader may have died in the mountains of Afghanistan. That's sort of circulated around, but again, that's not been confirmed by any major credible source. So we're not going to touch that, but it would, if this were to be correct, big emphasis on if, losing the 1 and 2 in the same time span would be a very big blow to Al-Qaeda's operational strength as a terror organization.
Yep, indeed. So do you want to lead the next story talk about it?
Yes. So our next topic is a very controversial subject. If any of you read the news or read social media, you have probably fallen to this lovely thing. President Macron of France this week announced measures to, in his mind, combat political Islam. These measures very much continue France's recent measures of going after what it sees as radical Islamic jihad. Part of these measures now say that imams will have to report all political activities to the French government. Children will now have ID cards to go to school, and we'll see much more restrictions on a lot of what is considered Islamic law to protect French cultural interests. Of course, I'm only repeating what the article I'm citing here, the BBC, stated. Now, why is this significant? Since the last terrorist act in France, a horrendous one of the beheading of a teacher and the killing of 3 people in Nice, President Macron has made it his priority to combat this terrorism in his sense, going after them hard. We've seen France very much adopt more harsher counterterrorism measures, and we've seen Macron himself go from the hero of the what was considered by many as liberalism to very much now taking a more right-wing approach on the issue of Islamic terrorism, to this point where some have argued, that he is actually more right-wing on Islam now than one Marine Le Pen. Of course, that's opinionated, points there. But yeah, Macron is doing this, and Macron is not the only leader right now in Europe proposing this. We've seen Sebastian Kurz in Austria push the same, and we've seen other European leaders basically hint at these ideas being floated around. So it's a very, very interesting possibility of the political situation of mainstream European values and Islam possibly having a schism as well, which would very much be a break, especially in the French way, of a long accepted view of multiculturalism being accepted.
Indeed. And one sort of underlooked area, I believe, at least, is how are Muslim communities in France perceiving this and responding to this. And ultimately, it does entirely depend on how they react as a community and how they see these laws. So they see them as being entirely discriminatory towards their religion. Does it go against this idea of secularism, or does it embolden this idea of secularism? Of course, I am not a Muslim. I do not have any real expertise on how this, how French Muslims will perceive or will actually be affected by said measures. But it will definitely be something. I guess the only real insight I have, or opinion to offer, is that they be involved significantly in the drafting of these laws, the construction of them, consulting, ensuring that if they are implemented properly, where measures where the government increases their control, that they're being done in a proper way. So the simple things like that, because ultimately what the French government is trying to do and hopes to succeed with is combating Islamism and terrorist activity in their borders. And the hope, of course, is that atrocious terrorist attacks aren't able to be committed or aren't able to exploit people, and foreign money isn't able to embolden terrorist groups within France. So yes, it definitely will be interesting to see. I say interesting. It'll definitely be consequential to see how these laws actually affect and how they actually go about their stated goal of trying to end or at least reduce the threat of radical Islamism, and also how other European countries adopt similar measures if they do work, and how they work across the European Union and other European countries.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to mention. I think its effect, what the Muslim community of France sees it. So far, it seems the perception and what's been said by them directly is absolute horror of the law, and I can understand this because this law very much targets their ability in many cases to do many things. And I think there's an interesting point here to mention, and it's very shocking that I have to say this, but if history of European polling's any indication, leaders who tend to go hard after Islam don't lose points in the polls. They actually gain points in the polls.
Yeah.
And we've seen Macron, for example, with this harsher line on Islam, taking votes from Marine Le Pen. I mean, who would have imagined that, 3 years ago when Macron was running against her in a runoff, that now possibly in the next French election, he might very well have the same, views on, on Islam as Mrs. Le Pen as well.
He's certainly having this rally around the flag effect following these terrorist attacks, and the measures he's announcing are being seen as decisive enough that yes, he is sustaining an incredibly high, or I say incredibly high for the French approval rating, which still lies in like the 40s or like 30s, but you get what I mean.
Yeah, and we should mention, of course, that being in the French approval ratings, there are great iconic numbers like President Hollande, like great 9% of the French public, President Sarkozy at 20%, and Chirac at 25%. The French love their presidents.
Yeah, I mean, Macron's been similar levels, but now he's getting approval ratings. I believe one I saw earlier today on the platform EuropoLex was about 42%, with Le Pen in the low 20s. So yeah, there's that to look at the electoral perspective of it, and if as you stated, the actual reaction by French Muslims was horror. If it actually works out in the end, or if it only emboldens Islamism within France. But again, that is going to be something that the French government will have to debate about. One interesting element, are we going to end here? Because I have another interesting little thing to add if we have time.
No, we're not. If you want to continue on the subject, that's fine. Since our next subject is going to be so brief because Taras isn't here, but we continue on this.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so an interesting element is the geopolitics of France developing and its opposition to Turkey. So elements like this of clamping down on Islam also represents the political goal of trying to say screw you, Turkey. The West doesn't need you. But also another interesting element that's coming up soon, I believe in the next week or so, maybe a little bit further, is that the French government is going to be voting on recognizing the Armenian genocide, which is fascinatingly something that a lot of Western countries just don't recognize. Take, for example, the UK. Did you know that only one council, that being Derby City Council, recognizes the Armenian genocide? The government doesn't. And this is a very long and complicated story about genocide denial from Western nations because they're trying to appease Turkey. But an interesting element you're seeing out of this combating of Islamism and the widening shift between France and Turkey, who is trying to embolden their role in the Middle East and representing the average Arab or Arab on the street, as I've seen quoted in books before, is that it's really the actual domestic politics of France is reflecting its foreign policy. So it will be interesting to see if other European nations who want to combat the growing, I guess, strength or at least independence of Turkey and their rejection of, part rejection of NATO, but also rejection of traditional Western allies, leads to other nations recognizing such atrocities such as the Armenian genocide. Now, obviously, it's quite bad that the one thing that caused them to actually recognize it is to one-up Turkey. But that's just another interesting element I wanted to quickly talk about because it's something that isn't really paid attention to. The Armenian genocide is not a element of genocides that's ever really discussed because it's too important to Turkey to upset them at least as their national government.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. I mean, with the Armenian genocide, I mean, the United States federal government hasn't recognized the genocide in strong wording since 1984 was the last time, because again, it was to appease Turkey when it was much more pro-Western than it is now.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's very sad to see the countries do not acknowledge it. I mean, it was at its time the worst genocide of the 20th century, only eclipsed by the Holocaust, the Khmer and Ranj, and those two. But yeah, it's a horrible thing that should never be forgotten. But yeah, it is interesting to see France poke Turkey in a sense, and France itself becoming much more involved in the counterterrorism in the Middle East, and it's historically, accepted itself to. I mean, France was always apart from in the war on terror, but we never saw the French basically engage in the same role, say, the Americans or the British. And now the French seem to be embracing that role of stopping terrorism, and whether it is effective or not remains to be seen. And I think it's an interesting point with Macron. I think that not to move somewhat away from the subject, but Macron's transformation as a politician.
Yeah.
He's gone from first this left to center guy serving in the French socialist government to this centrist liberal to pretty much now, I think it's fair to say, a conservative type, president of France, economically conservative, now culturally moving the conservative way. I mean, Macron himself is not the same Macron that ran 3 years ago in that thing. If you played the clips today, you'd think you're looking at two different people.
It's a fascinating evolution of a character and really represents the believed coalitions that Macron believes he has to appeal to. But yeah, I think
Le Pen voters and left Republican voters.
Exactly. And to be honest, with a left that is so divided amongst itself with socialists and Greens, it seems like Macron is trying to exploit this gap. Which or this at least so many flanks that he's trying to take out his opponents on, especially on the right. But then it's interesting as well legislatively who he is aligning himself with, because ultimately he doesn't have to the same extent actually worry about electoral coalitions with the right. And more relies upon other centrist and liberal parties. Okay. So it'll be interesting if those centrist and liberal parties continue to stick with Macron as he goes through this, I guess, the battle against Islamism.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things, at last point on this subject, not to kill it to death, but is sort of the differentiating views of of France as a society. I mean, the French society that isn't Islamic has applauded this decision. I think it's a fantastic thing that Macron's doing if you will start asking the French public. But then obviously French Muslims are horrified of this. It's an interesting and yet horrifying dynamic of one group is targeted, but the rest of the public supports it because in their minds it's keeping them safe.
Exactly. And that's what I mean. This is why it's such a difficult topic to talk about, because what the law represents is something to try and combat terrorism. But the means to combat terrorism, it has incredibly adverse effects, and this is why I don't feel entirely not comfortable, but I'm not enough of an expert to offer too far of an opinion, because ultimately, as I said, I'm not a French Muslim. I'm not a Muslim at all. I don't have the ability to offer how this could possibly be prejudiced against them. beyond what they're saying. And so I think it is incredibly important that they are a part of the conversation here, but it doesn't really seem like they are.
Yeah,
But
no,
like,
yeah.
it's a difficult conversation, and I implore people to do further research and to actually look at a wide breadth of people who are talking about this, because it is such an important thing, because as I said, it can have such adverse effects.
Yeah, and I think one of the last things on this subject is really, I don't like to go back in the past, but almost in the sense what Macron's sort of doing is very different from what George Bush after 9/11 did. I mean, George Bush's first thing was to go to a mosque and say Islam is a religion of peace. Muslims are good people. It's just quite fascinating to see the difference now, almost 19 years later, of when 9/11 occurred. The President of the United States, George Bush, basically was doing the unifying effect, and here we are 19 years later, and Macron's doing more of the
Though it's still important to recognize that unifying effect didn't work entirely, and still Muslims faced prejudice
right
to an extent in response to 9/11, because
but in terms of rhetoric is what I meant.
I completely agree.
Yeah, I mean, yes, they did face that, and look, they got an unfair label wrapped on them that they had absolutely nothing to do with because of where those hijackers were from. But moving on this topic, since I think we've exhausted it enough for one show, quick update on another story. This would have been Terrace's block, but unfortunately he cannot join us because he's doing projects that he's behind. Very sad. That is that the church parish of Serbia's Orthodox Church has died from COVID. He got COVID from an open-air funeral of another priest in Belgrade. It got to the parish, and he has died from it. Patrick Andrade, who was 90 years old, who has been in charge of the church for decades, was got COVID for not wearing a mask in an open air summit funeral. And now the Serbian Orthodox Church, which has been very powerful in Serbian society, has no leader and has to find a new one.
Yeah, I have nothing to add at all. I am not have any expertise to add on this, but it's good to add as a piece of news. And hope that the Orthodox Church is able to find a new leader.
Indeed, and this reminder: if you're doing stuff, wear a mask or social distance.
Especially you, Georgia Senate candidate, Loeffler.
Kelly Loeffler.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a Senate. It's a Senate.
Yeah,
anyway,
so probably the nastiest Senate races in America. But anyway, moving on. We are now at everyone's favorite time when the magnificent loser of the week is revealed, and we get to see the pure genius of our elected or any official getting to display their beautifulness. And Adam's choice, he is a dandy who he has chosen this week. And I let Adam explain his loser of the week.
So I, a while back, decided to give this caricature of Rudy Giuliani as like a knight on a white horse to Donald Trump riding down upon the hill, which is obviously, the hill is New York. And he's riding down to the land, which is Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, to go around telling people that the election, or there was fraudulent results across the United States election. Now, the reason I want to put him, Rudy Giuliani, as loser of the week is because they have all failed, or at least from my record of everything that I've read so far, every single legal challenge that he's tried to present forward has completely failed and hasn't been able to be taken seriously. And I cast my mind back to prior to the election, where this was a debated idea of what is going to happen with the legal challenges that the Trump team will put forward. Now, with Georgia certifying its results, I believe today, which show that Biden wins the state by about 12,000 votes. And this will, I believe, is it Arizona or Michigan, or at least one state certifies their results on Monday.
I think it's Arizona.
Yeah, this will only cement what has been known for quite a while, which is Joe Biden is the president-elect of the United States. And yeah, Rudy Giuliani has spent a lot of time trying to contest this, but ultimately everyone has failed. And also, I'd like to say why he's loser of the week, because of a very embarrassing press conference where he wasn't wearing a mask, first of all, and was in this what looked like a very crowded, sweaty room in which what looked like his hair dye, well, I say looked like, it was almost 100% his hair dye, dripping down his face. And I just find that very funny because, oh my God, I have never seen such a perceived, respected figure descend down so much. Looking back at the fact he was a front runner in the 2008 Republican primary, and then also that, looking at the fact he was, a respected figure, mayor of New York, and all of these, he was, I believe, planning to run for Senate.
He was running for Senate.
Yeah. Sorry. Right. Yeah, it was. Sorry. But yeah, ultimately, he has had such a downfall. And oh my God. Oh my God.
Yes, I mean, from America's mayor to America's meme of the day.
Yeah. Did you all watch My Cousin Vinny? No, Rudy Giuliani. I haven't. I'm 17.
Rudy. Can we get the Rudy of 2001 back, please?
I believe. Sorry, just a quick thing. Was he considered to be on the left of the Republican Party at the time? Yeah. How things change.
When he ran twice, all the 3 times he ran for mayor of New York, the once he lost and the 2 he won. His secondary affiliation, because New York has very strange election laws where you can multiple parties, run you on their ticket. He ran with the Liberal Party right attached with him. Liberal pro-choice mayor, but tough on crime. But no, my loser of the week, not as funny as Adams, is Susan Rice. As reported this week, Susan Rice is no longer the front runner for the Secretary of State job. It is now one Anthony Blinken. Now, it should be noted, I am not a big fan of Rice, but Rice has long wanted to be Secretary of State. And for her, this is probably a massive blow should she not get the job, considering she was in line to get the job in 2012 before her infamous Benghazi Sunday show comments, which then led to Republicans saying they would never confirm her in 2013, and Barack Obama had to pull her name from consideration and go with Senator John Kerry at the time. Now Susan Rice, who could have been the VP candidate and could have now been Secretary of State, looks like she may not have that role, depending on if the media is to be reported here.
And also also depends on the 2 Georgia Senate races.
Yes.
If Democrats are able to win then, I imagine that Biden will feel completely fine with putting someone who is quite loyal to him up forward as his Secretary of State. Yeah,
there's the 2 Georgia Senate races, which are possible. Though it would be very, strenuous for her to have to get through, those votes. And it's to be noted that if the Republicans win, any hope for Susan Collins to even get a floor vote would be pretty much DOA. For her, it's probably, if she does not become Secretary of State, a job she has long wanted. It's a big blow, and hence why she's my loser of the week. And for Anthony Blinken, he was already expected to have a powerful job in the Biden administration. Secretary of State on the resume isn't a bad thing at all. And it should be noted, Blinken is as hawkish as Rice, if more hawkish than Rice. His favorite line is "America is the doer of good in the world at all costs." But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what Rice. She's my loser of the week. I could have gone on with a different loser, but she just felt appropriate for this week. But yes, I will say the night that is Rudy Giuliani strolling into Philadelphia, beating up those, people doing voter fraud is, I think, the perfect loser of the week.
Remember, it wasn't the Russians, it wasn't the Chinese, it was the Venezuelans. And that's where the conspiracy was all along. Who would have thought it? Not me.
It's also now about Dominion machines. They've been hacked.
Oh, Dominion. Right, don't get me started. Oh.
That's my second loser of the week. They've been attacked by the President of the United States. I didn't realize the Republican Party now are now Democrats in 2004.
If we're throwing out a second person, Brian Kemp. he is also a possible loser of the week. I doubt he's going to get, seriously primary challenged because of his, adherence to the deep state by certifying these results and being a traitor to the one true cause of getting
And
Trump
defending his
president.
state's handling of votes, saying that the Georgia
Exactly,
Secretary of State did nothing wrong.
exactly. He's not going to be popular with the Republican base at all. So who knows actually how that will play out in any future primaries, possibly against him. I personally doubt it, but who knows?
Who knows? Yes, indeed, yes. I mean, we've had Dominion get shrugged, and it should be noted if the president's team can't make it actual good legal case on Dominion, they can actually sue for defamation. Fun fact.
No.
So
Maybe that'll be one of the loser of the weeks. The U.S. government getting sued, but who knows?
But no, yes, it's always a fun show. And to those, our main Twitter account at Elections Daily was suspended, but we've had a new account get created. So follow that at Elections Daily 2. That's right, Elections Daily 2. And if you enjoy this show, if you couldn't watch this show entirely, or you missed this show anytime, you can download us on Spotify, Apple, or any other podcast. Or just wait till this comes up on YouTube. Subscribe on YouTube, and you'll get us immediately. And you can see me and Adam talking. You can see him in his sixth form, attire, and depending on the day of the week, either in a serious mode or today because it's I'm on Thanksgiving break. Go on vacation mode.
Maybe I want to get a floral shirt just so we could be matching. That could be fun.
Got to get that Hawaiian shirt, man. Maybe this time, of course, you can have, a Lib Dem meme on the shirt. I didn't say that, of course.
No, it would be a white T-shirt, just empty, with like a drawn-on bar chart or something like that, with Lib Dems in here. I'm not afraid to make fun of my party.
Well, then again, we can always put the meme that was, 2015 on the shirt. But anyway, thank you, folks. As always, we always appreciate this. For our American viewers, happy Thanksgiving. Since our next show will be after Thanksgiving, I hope whatever you do this year, stay safe. If you are seeing family, practice normal behavior that is acceptable to the COVID era, not traditional normal behavior at Thanksgiving. So don't go up to your usual cousin and try to play football and try to, break his ribs. But anyway, and Jav, have happy Thanksgiving. Enjoy your football, enjoy your turkey, and come back on Friday when you're probably, stuffed and watch the two nerds talk about the world. But anyway, I wish you well and have a great rest of your week.